Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let's start. Allow me to welcome all of you here. We are about to start a discussion on BigTechs, whether they are angels or demons, and the topic was suggested by our MEGA regulator. It sounds a bit romantic, but on the other hand, I'm not sure what the Uber regulator meant, and you don't really understand what the central bank wants from you sometimes. Let me introduce the participants in today's discussion, and we'll find out what it's all about. All right, we have Ivan Glazachev, CEO of Yandex.Money. Let's give them a warm welcome. Dmitry, Eremeev, Chairman of the Board of Directors of Bank 131. Bogdan Zadorozhny, Business Development Director of Alipay and Financial. Nikita Saygutin, Vice President for Digital Finance Services from Ozon, and Andrey Sebrant from Yandex, Director of Product Marketing. We are going to discuss BigTechs. It's not a typical thing to do that here at this conference. Usually here they mean they speak about fintech, and BigTechs started outside of the financial industry, and then over time, for some reason, these companies wanted to expand, or they thought it would be good to expand into finances. We are going to be talking why it's happening on a variety of levels in different time periods, also at the level of the industry and individual companies. Before we start the discussion, let me ask you a quick question. There's a standard answer in each one of your companies, but still, why did BigTechs get this motivation to offer financial services, and why are they competitive compared with traditional finances? Thanks for this question. It's a question that requires a rather brief answer. It's not just 2 or 3 factors. Where are those competitive advantages coming from? We as human beings have to breathe and eat. We have a certain life cycle, and finances are not what attracts attention, or not what we really need to survive. But at the same time, this is part of our life, and it's not surprising for people to breathe and do everything else. Companies, in the same way companies come to the financial service, it's like organic development. After a certain stage of growth, it's cheaper to do it yourself in-house, right, than to consume somebody else's services. If you want me to be brief, there are 3 key elements, in my opinion, to answer why BigTechs are so competitive. They have cheap client traffic. They have the laziness of inborn laziness of the clients, and they have their clients' trust to a certain digital giant, to their brand, to their level of service. All right, thank you. I agree with Ivan here. It's a huge client base, low cost of attracting all these people, network synergy between all these services and the core business of a big tech, and the ability to offer them a unique user experience. I think big tech likes to adjust and correct things around it, which is most painful for the users. Remember how we were trying to flag down a car in the taxi in the streets in the past, or how you wanted to buy dinner in the evening. Now you realize why BigTechs deliver food today. There are millions of problems connected with payment, and BigTechs have one other advantage in the market. They know how to do things really fast. Okay, it's about speed then. Bogdan. Well, right. The big tech companies have their own user scenarios. They have this direct contact with the client, and the client can use that to satisfy one of their needs. And finances is like a blood circulation system that ensures that demand is met. All right. Thank you. And we'll get back to that question. And let's start the discussion. Andrey, you first. Next to you, you have 5 obvious angels, and Andrey said he likes to correct everything that's painful for the users. But there's a backside, the reverse side of the coin. Markets where big techs come from, they often monopolized, or they control a huge share of the market, and they use this monopoly-like power to their advantage. And is there a threat there, or are these natural monopolies, much like oil and gas pipelines? Usually they use American or European experience. Yes, it is monopolized there in those geographies, and in Russia, I'm quite surprised about monopolizing the market by big tech. Can you name any monopolies here in Russia or in China? There are normally several major players, depending on the industry, but in search engines, Yandex is quite the monopoly, or at least the market leader. Well, I wish we were ahead of everyone else that much, but we get about 60% of requests or inquiries. So social networks, Facebook is a textbook example when they talk about big tech monopoly, but in our country it's even worse. We have several such social networks, not just Facebook and ВКонтакте. Одноклассники is a very powerful social network, and Moy Mir is still alive. And this is what I argue against. When big techs come to a certain industry, it brings about a monopoly. Even if it happened in the US, it doesn't necessarily mean that the same will happen in China, Korea, or Russia. And that's not something that we are witnessing right now. I can add a few things about China. If we look at individual areas, there may be 1 or 2 companies that dominate, but it's not a monopoly, it's rather an oligopoly. And there's a trend towards developing ecosystems, and they're all moving in the same direction. Some are historically strong in e-commerce, like Alibaba, that started from that, and others are strong in social media, like Tencent, but they're all moving in the same direction. Andrey, let me ask you a question in a different way. When your market is based on oligarchy, it's not the best option either. Don't you think that big techs are like Soviet ministries? I can tell you for sure, no. Before I started to work in high-tech, I worked for 20 years in the medium machine building industry, and they had a really rigid and strict system of planning. We don't have that long-term planning in the market situation. Medium machine building was a very special node, uniting all these areas around it. In FinTech, it's a bit different, but the companies are turning into something that is based on using the same type of data. It's about choosing the terminology correctly and the system of coordinates correctly. It's not about BigTechs, but rather the platforms. And it's true, there is this term, the economy of platforms, and platforms have to be big. What is a small platform? You can understand small business, but a small platform cannot be a platform by definition. And BigTechs are platforms, but it's not a feature of a technology. It's because from the economy of individual companies, we're moving to the economy of platforms. It is something new that we got thanks to BigTechs, but there are different laws there, and their oligopoly is built into the system. When you ask this question 3 times, you get the answer that you're looking for. Okay, friends, you can also ask questions. It was my mistake, and I have this application. If you want to ask a question, and I will be addressing them to our speakers. And all right, let's talk about Yandex. All right, you have part of the platform that offers services to business or to another one to retail. Are there conflicts between these parts, and how do you resolve these conflicts? I'm going to be talking not from the point of view of Yandex, because Yandex.Деньги is the subsidiary of 2 companies, Yandex and Sberbank. And Yandex only holds, what, a quarter of shares. In terms of development or strategic development of the company, it doesn't matter who controls what. We look at the big Yandex platform, as we call it, and the Sberbank platform. The business is based on these platforms, Yandex.Деньги, and is a special type of business. We are platform native business. We have Yandex.Деньги and Yandex.Kassa, 2 different parts of our business, and we combine 22 payment methods, and only one of them is our own. Others are different cards, and they believe that we compete with other such methods of payment like Kiwi or others and other services. We are not the originator of all these processes that we offer our clients. Last year, for instance, we launched this pay by installments project, and we connected about 8,000 points of sale to that system. But we are not the factory of credit or loans. We are a platform that offers the traffic. We deal with the client's laziness. We offer this process online, and we are the kind of platform that that enjoys this trust from the client. There's this issue, who owns the data and who stores the data and so on, and the clients know that they can trust us. We deal with all these issues within our platform. We combine it and we offer them a service, and that's what the wallet service is based on. It's not the kind of service that we offered in the early noughties, and it combines a big variety of services, and the competition is for this client traffic and their trust. Any platform-based service needs to be integrated. It means money and time. It also requires support and certain client experience. For example, we have a number of services that are technically ready to be deployed, but we don't do that because the price is not right yet for the client, the just price, or this seamless experience to help our clients to deal with their laziness problem.
I don't know how true that story is, but it concerns the story of the Apple Card that was launched only last year, but it was ready to be launched in 2002. And the reason why it wasn't launched earlier is that launching another card with a bonus program for the same company, infrastructurally it was not ready, and the client experience wasn't exactly ready to accept that. So they waited till the moment only to launch it recently. So the struggle, the competition is for those elements, it's not for these some external participants. Well, the story with the Apple Pay, there is many more interests that came together, like Goldman Sachs approving of the operations. So why aren't you totally covering the banking services? Well, one of the indexes or indicators for the success is the seamless and smooth transfer. It's the stickiness of the experience and the life cycle of the client in the bank, depending on how long the client has been with the bank. So stickiness has been dropping recently because now it's become easier to transfer from one organization to another. So this is closely related to a client experience, and it is easier nowadays to accept or have or get a client who used to belong to another organization. But if a client experience can be improved and you have some, it will mean that you will retain your clients today and tomorrow. Nikita, but I have a question that about the fact that you have launched this crediting or loaning program, and you have some crowdfunding financial services. Why have you chosen these functions? Where do you did you get that new banking space? Because there are other companies who are in this business. Thank you for this question, and the answer has been already spoken up. In some of the BigTechs, some like Alibaba, or they have been able to create complementary financial businesses, and e-commerce in Russia is represented as a mixture of commercial e-commerce platforms of the United States and China, and there are the biggest players who are growing from year to year, and thanks to that, we have more and more services. Our platform is called Marketplace, which brings together buyers and sellers, and sellers bring their goods to our storage spaces, and we offer them the last mile service, and we have unique data in the turnover and sales dynamics using this marketplace platform, and with the data processing, and we have a source of funding, which is client traffic of physical persons and our sellers, who are trusted loan takers. So we represent clients, we offer the last mile service, we represent clients, and so forth. As for the payment delays, we need to state that there is a client experience involved as well, because the banking services cannot offer loans online all the time. And there is a big data available that can be monetized as well. Well, this is an honest question to the first rapid-fire question, because there are banking services and there are methods of analysis. Andrey, before we go any further, I'd like to refer to another question that came from the audience, talking about the attraction of new payment services clients. Why are banking services not being able to provide for that? Well, the first answer is the speed. In order for the banks to react, to respond, or they need to feel that client's pain or necessity, and it usually takes years for a traditional banking service to respond. But in the context of BigTechs, it's about a matter of a few months. 3 months. Bogdan, I have a question for you. So in the context of discussing Alichat and Alipay, their domestic market is very much integrated in the day-to-day life for the consumer. So the users, consumers, they live in that, exist in that ecosystem. In your opinion, how can we provide or guarantee honesty and fairness for the market, for the client, because we need to justify our offers to be able to attract them to our services. Well, the industry should be competitive. Well, I think the user has a choice, has a freedom of choice, which guarantees them the fairness of services. And in that sense, there are no monopolies in the full sense of the word. And we don't see it in Russia as we see it in China or the United States. As for the big data volume from the clients, it is very advantageous, and it's being used to analyze the offers and financial services. So it's a seamless thing, because Alipay wallet, for example, it is not a financial application in the mindset of the user. It's more of a trait of day-to-day life or traditional activities. And in order to solve a life issue, a real-life issue, there are financial products hidden under the hood of that application. So very naturally, it is attracted or integrated in day-to-day life of a regular citizen. It doesn't draw any negative attention to it on behalf of bigger companies. As far as the commercial side to the story, talking about China, the market there compared to the Russia's market is more capitalizable. There is a bigger client traffic, more coverage, and platform-based e-commerce companies, they no longer are taking care of minor things. It's very similar to the food delivery or taxi services in Russia. So a lot of effort in the marketing context is drawn to attract more clients. So the final user, the end user, is the winner of in the situation. So you're waiting for everybody else to leave the market before you can come in. Is that the story? So you will come in with other conditions, other offers. Well, over time there will be new services, and the old services will be modified, new models will be invented. Thank you. Dmitry. Bank 131 is the first bank who, in the recent 5 years, has received a banking services license, and you began as a minor technological company. So you used to specialize in cashback services. Why did you decide to go further? So what's your take on what's the trend in the development of fintechs or BigTechs not related to the traditional banking? Thank you. Thank you very much. I wouldn't say that it's not really connected too much to the cashback services. I'll just share about what problems we are solving and our attitude towards the big techs. As they say, regulation is always lagging behind innovations. There is always something new happening around the block, and there will be regulators following. The processes will change eventually. 10 to 15 years ago, there were very few use cases where people lived in one country and were making money in another country. There were Google, who would send banking checks by mail, and there was a huge pain in order to actually receive the money. You had to spend actually to wait 4 months and pay big fees for that. But for that moment, 15 years ago, it was when a physical person was living in one country and was making money in another country. It was very, the market of the client base was actually very specialized, and everything began changing and very fast. And if before we used, and let me use this example, Airbnb company, I kind of like them and I mentioned them a lot, but short-term apartment rent, for example, independent of where we live, in Europe or in Russia, and I would just transmit money for the short-term apartment rent through banking transfer or by other means. But now it's getting easier nowadays, and another process is happening. For example, we are registered at Airbnb, and the money from your card is withdrawn to Ireland, an Ireland account. There will be a 20% fee charge to the card, and we're talking about a local process here in a very particular, very specific market. And that process is not global; it's local, but the Uberization is taking place. The big thing, the priority is to collect money and then to pay back to those who are actually renting out their apartments. And Visa and MasterCard, they didn't come ready for that reality, and they were not capable of solving that problem. And nowadays there is a demand for that, because it's quite obvious to me, because the Uber-like businesses are very efficient. It's very obvious to everyone. We're talking about globalization, and all the economy will be a giga economy, and various platforms are developing. But here there are a lot of difficulties coming up. In order to solve those difficulties, we launched our services in order to provide international business companies, including Russian companies, provide simple and clear interfaces to collect money legally and to receive a back payment for the Russian market, and further, eventually, for other markets outside Russia. And from this point of view, we see problems. I see ourselves as problem solvers of specific problems, because well, the problem is in the overall economy, and it just raises a question: does anybody else see this, and why isn't anybody solving this? But it will take somebody to solve this problem. Let me interrupt you, but there is a very well-known a startup who is also is solving this. So they installed the payment terminals in small coffee shops across the United States, and because they actually came up with a strong competitor to standard services, which charge a lot. Yeah, the process of acquiring money by a banking check used to take up to 4 months. Now it's only a few days. In order to run a bank transfer, traditionally it used to be a necessity to be linked to a SWIFT, then in order to actually acquire the money. But in order to do that, you have to read actually a long manual of rules and conditions. And if you would like to go into the Chinese market, for example, you would have to actually read through the Chinese conditions, but it moves very slow, too slow. And for now, there are 3 actually problems to solve, because global companies, they want to cooperate. And if their share in Russia is only 1% maximum, but they cannot integrate physically. They can't afford to integrate themselves and to invest a lot, but they have to have a compliant mechanism in order to receive and acquire money while working here. So understanding the Uberization process actually helps.
What happened is, when this offshore system, which was designed for totally different things by Anglo-Saxons, was demanded by this Uber economics, and it sped up the development of this kind of economy, and then governments began to lose whole markets, like those of taxi cabs or real estate. Major problems started, but nobody wants these problems. Neither these global companies. They're already efficient enough. They are great with feedback. They simplify our processes. They bring us good and reducing costs. And the users want to interact with these companies, because try to get RMB money here in Russia. And I know how. This is how it happens, but it does not mean that Airbnb wants that. There are no other solutions, but everyone is going to be doing that. I love Yandex, actually. As a company, if we talk about competition, I did not comment on globalization and monopolization, but de facto, we need to understand one simple thing. Currently, even if you are a super monopoly or a leader in, even if you are a leader in a country with 1%, 2%, 3% of GDP, you won't be able to fight global players in the long-term prospect, because they will hire your own coders, they will hire your own specialists, and they will be able to use so many resources for their product that you will lose the battle. The way I understand it, I want to help global companies get to the local markets, local companies get to the global markets, and bring them together. Cashback is just one of the problems. When we work with AliExpress and we have to reimburse some of the cost of the purchase to our client, we need interfaces that do it quickly. What do? We speed up the development of this type of economy, and the legislation that comes that binds things together, like that Google tax and other initiatives that try to make the situation easier for Russian companies in the Russian market, at least here locally. And we will all have to build local entities and get local regulation. That's why we not only do it in Russia, but in other countries. The future is with global products and local licenses and entities. Transparency. The big tech don't face that kind of problem about where they will be doing it. There are lots of questions from the audience. And here's one interesting question. Are big techs ready to share their data with banks, and on what terms? Are there any industry-wide pilot cases? Who wants to start? All right. Big techs are moving to fintechs, right? This is what we're talking about. They get banking licenses or form partnerships with banks or use these banks as a service. Depending on a specific model, they are willing to share. If it's a bank as a service, yes. If it's partnership, and yes. If it's their own license, they don't need third-party banks. Yes, to put it roughly, yes. Depending on the level of your interaction, if you work with a partner, you always share with your partner. If you have 1 million, if you have 1,000 banks that interact with you, of course, you cannot share the same amount of data with all of them. Bogdan, would you like to add anything? Here in Russia, we cooperate with Tinkoff Bank in terms of post-lending services on AliExpress, and we do give them some data for the right kind of scoring. It depends on the experienced user in the final product, and that determines the cooperation model, how deeply it will be developed, and how much data will be required. I noticed that many big tech companies start cooperating with financial institutions, training them in the use of their credit model, and then they choose the banks based on their broker model. If we talk about lending, there's no global readiness for such an exchange. There were some specific projects where there was a certain level of data exchange, but it always stayed at the level of some limitations. There were limitations. They may have their own common ideas, but there are always discussions about the types of columns and fields in those data tables that they are going to get or not get. And the parties are not ready for such an exchange. And if we're talking about real smart data management to really predict what the clients want, that's always still ahead of us. No one is ready for that. It may be too bold, but no company knows their client yet. Yandex.Деньги says yes, the big Yandex.Деньги says yes, the big Yandex says no, or these are just different ideas about how much data exchange is enough. There's lots of data that don't have to be shared with their bank partners, and they trust big tech because we try as much as we can to keep our users' data safe. There are no cases when big tech would offer any of this data to the gray or black market. there's lots of data there, but none of that comes from big tech. It's about reputation. You can just switch easily there. You switch from one search engine to another. We share as much as we think is reasonable. Knowing the amount of our data, we always want much more. We'll talk about that. Dmitry, one more question to you. You get another question. We were looking for your last name in blockchain, but we found your name in this angels and demons session. There's no hidden meaning in it. When we talk about blockchain, for many regulators, it means high risk, and that's a reasonable approach. I have lots of ideas about is there any hidden agenda here? No. As a bank, we are not going to work with cryptocurrency. We're not going to use blockchain as a bank. Since I was invited here as a representative of my bank, I thought it would be logical to talk about this particular topic. But if you want to ask me about something else, I'll be glad to share my views. Let me tell you, we don't have much time left. There are lots of questions to each one of you. Maybe some people from the audience would like to approach you later and ask you those questions directly. Let me move on to this other topic. Dmitry, you mentioned that the governments understood they were losing whole markets. That's why the central bank wanted this big tech session. Yesterday we had some interesting comments from our Chinese colleagues about why they're doing it. Some local faster payments system. We heard all those debates about the FPS here in Russia. The Federal Reserve is working on that. The other central banks follow. And Facebook and Libra, and that's another project which is debated today. All right, we have big tech with a good, well-developed ecosystem. If it has its own currency, it will be quite liquid. You can offer lots of different services. It means that your means of payment has certain meaning. And is big tech a competitor against the regulators in that sense? I don't really understand. How are we competing with the regulators? Okay, in some horizontal system of payments, because you have many users and your ultimate cost. But how do we compete with the regulator? If we are legal and lawful, we cannot do anything that goes against the instructions of the regulator. It's hard to argue with that. Maybe with Yandex it's a more complicated story, but you set the rules within your own ecosystem. You develop services, and regulators in general are concerned with big tech. I'm not talking about Yandex specifically, but they think big tech could be an alternative source of power similar to their own. This interaction is based on different principles. The regulator, when they help the market to grow, they don't say, all right, here's a new field, we are going to regulate it and go there and try to build something there. First, this new area of business emerges, and then it reaches such a size that the regulator intervenes. And in fintech and in big tech, for sure, there's this foundation, this base that is later used to generate something new. Big tech works in several industries. Their main asset is data, and the regulator regulates only one area. This regulation takes longer to develop than what big tech is doing. Let me give you an example. Regulation of advertising. They wanted a law on internet advertising early on, and then pretty soon they found out that no such law is needed. They just had to make small amendments to the law on advertising. There is no virtual money online and real money that the banks use. This is the same money. When we talk about advertising, and you're not allowed to lie when you are promoting something or in your advertisements, and whether you sell medical products or whatever. And there are some technical special features of internet as a special environment for advertising. They just get a few items in the legislation adjusted, and that's it. But to change it altogether would be unreasonable.
That's why, again, BigTechs, they create the foundation for effective amendment and modification, modernization of the regulation processes. This is the way I view this reality. Just I imagine that I'm coming to the central bank and explaining to them that we have a Libra service introduced. Don't worry about that. It's one of the same money. So that's why we don't know exactly what's going to happen with this Libra system, because we need to, on behalf of the regulator, they need to discuss it first and negotiate, because sometimes the picture is not clear. And that's why we're talking about the so-called new money which Libra is trying to introduce. That's where the concern of the regulator comes in. A limited number of cryptocurrencies are actually creating the reality and the meat of the ecosystem that the regulator will build their rules on. And first, this sandlot needs to be created, and then there will be new regulations. But Libra is, well, if you look at their disclaimer or memorandum, it's very interesting. Bogdan, as part of the regulation topic, it's interesting to talk about the way that Russia chooses. What you can tell us about our model of development, what's the specifics, and how we'll be developing? Bogdan, please, you have the floor. Well, it is clear that in Russia, which is different from other countries of Europe and the West, Russia has new functions as far as digital banking services. This is what differs Russia from China. And we used to have slower and more traditional banks, and all of a sudden there became a new reality on behalf of BigTechs and new platforms. We've talked about Alipay and WeChat wallets. In Russia, wallets emerged at the same moment, the same time with China, along with Yandex.Money and Kiwi and so forth. But they took a different route, not trying to create to cover a segment of financial needs and necessities that are covered generally by the banks in a general sense. It's not only online, but or various specific categories of sellers offline or other money transfers. The difference was from the regulatory point of view. In China, the regulator allowed those wallet services to grow to a large-scale volume, just not gaining big mass, critical mass of clients and sellers. And maybe 2 years ago, there was a more tight regulation happening in China. In Russia, there is a different approach of a very meticulous expertise of the business model, of the possible risks, and so the meticulous expertise is taking place in order to mitigate or prevent those risks in the future. That's the difference. Excuse me, Andrey turned on his mic. I just wanted to add that yes, in some sense, in some ways, we have a different and more difficult situation. There is a different story about the Bitcoin, for example, because it's not still legalized, but a confirmation from the Chinese experience, everything is decided by the scale of the event. And, well, the question is, since when the government decides to intervene, and there is a lot of options. Ivan, please go ahead. Possibly Russia, in the sense of developing of electronic payment services, is a very advanced country. We have seen electronic wallets appear just at the verge of the 21st century. And on the basis of those wallets, there has been a new ecosystem emerging. And the wallet and the financial component to it is a very important structural unit of every ecosystem. In the context of regulations, we have a very complex or complicated position, because we have seen for several consecutive years in Russia, there has been tighter rules introduced, and there has been more regulation introduced towards electronic wallets. And there was a new federal law introduced for limiting of limitations for replenishing of anonymous wallets. But those areas are still very, very regulated and even over-regulated. There is a limit to the amount of withdrawal, for example. And as for the structure in the business, it's a very small share. It's about 1% of over-regulated wallets. The simplified verification, for example, is a much more simple thing, using counter-agents as banks. So this over-regulation towards the anonymous part of the e-commerce, because it's a funnel, and our clients are for the most part very lazy, and of course they don't understand why you should use a service which you cannot use to the full. And if you have to actually go physically somewhere to actually verify your personality, your person, and it doesn't make any difference between this and a traditional banking service. So, yeah, there is a problem, another problem existing of the cash that hasn't been accounted for, and central banks the central bank is accepting reports from other banks on the transparency of transactions and so forth. And we introduced new limitations in last September as far as the federal law requires. By 30%, we have seen a reduction. So each and every client will cost us even more, and as a financial organization, we will have to compensate for that reduction by introducing new fees and new services and new conditions, and interacting with other banks for attracting clients or referring clients. So it actually contradicts with what is necessary, and that is the attraction of the more and more population in the financial transparent contour framework. And let me repeat myself that on the basis of wallets as a very light and easy to use instrument or tool, the big tech giants in the world, they will be entering the Russian market sooner or later, and from 1% they will leap up to 5% of share, and we need to counteract to this prospect. And Dmitry asked the question, and how exactly we will counteract, and because we have to have those necessary drivers of growth, either technologically or from the legislative point of view, to improve or to promote the client potential. But the regulation and legislation should be worked on. Thank you. Nikita, you know, I'm referring this next question from the audience to you. Let's just touch on this topic for a few minutes. Ethical security of the data. For example, you're reselling goods that the client doesn't want to disclose, and it's a long discussion. But just try and stay short on this answer. The question is, repeat the question, please. The question is about the ethical use, fair use of the client's data. For example, the buyer wouldn't like to disclose the certain preferences or certain characteristics of the goods they are purchasing through the Ozon platform. How do you tackle that issue? Thank you for the question. Well, Ozon is working closely with the client feedback, and our models that we already have in place, that we show that are transparent as far as targeting such cases from the clients. We do see them, we do receive them, and we readjust and we fine-tune our conditions for improving our services. So, since you had a very brief answer, let me give you another rapid-fire question. So, what exact trend our big tech will follow, and what financial services in the Russian realities will be mostly provided? Thank you for the question. It depends on the main business that the big techs will be running. For example, there is Yandex. Is it big tech? Yes. Is it considered to be a big tech? There is a service called Yandex.Money. They provide services and payment services and issuance of cards and so forth. As far as bank loans, I don't know. There is another group, a platform, mail.ru. There is a question still pending question how they will monetize their client base. And so, looking at other e-commerce businesses, we understand that by developing of such auxiliary or additional services, we are developing our business. It's a complementary sector of services. I'd like to look at it from another angle. We're talking about the leading big techs, but fintechs like Sebrant, for example, is the largest as a company as a fintech, and they're building their ecosystem based on their main trend of activity, and they're developing their services using a traditional. Do you think this is a viable model? because oftentimes we look at it as the financial services developing first, and then the the technical services provided, then financial services are added to that. But there is some savings economy methods that vary, and that's viable, I think. Dmitry, could you please briefly answer the question in the context of what just has been said? Is there a strategic development idea? Yes, of course. Our idea is to become an ecosystem within an ecosystem shortly. So it would be logical to say that, again, everybody is trying to go to lunch, but I just would like to comment on what has been said here. Yeah, I'll give you a minute. For example, talking about the anonymous wallets and about the approach of regulators in various countries, I think it's a very interesting discussion because the central bank is a very strict regulator, a very strict bank. They're meticulously checking everything. And depending on the country, conditions differ. Like in Europe or in Great Britain, the approach is more towards the content. So you should be able to analyze your risks. And in Russia, oftentimes the risks are being calculated very meticulously by the experts of the central bank, but they don't oftentimes look at the content or the core issue, and the core issue of the business can be very different, and there are things to work on. As for the function of the regulator towards the anonymous wallet, it's a very general overall picture. It's a general trend, and a lot of international organizations in Europe, they have a PST2, for example. Well, there is a regulation of sanction screening. It needs to be checked. And if you have a new client named Abdullah, you should be able, well, with all due respect to all Abdullahs in the world, there should be some rules and some in regulatory functions without putting extra pressure on the clients. Let's not overdo it. It should be done. We need to have understanding and be more aware of the content in each individual case, and to be competitive in providing more advantageous or privileges to the businesses working in Russia. Otherwise, we will not see any of them next year on a panel. We won't have Google here, but we will still have Bogdan, who will probably speak Chinese next time. And we would like to see more Russian-speaking panelists here. So on this positive note, let's close. And we have some representatives of the central bank here. And let's close this discussion. Thank you to all the participants, and thank you for spending this hour with us here.